4 years ago now, when I was 24, my mum died of breast cancer, and as both my grandmothers had also died of it, I saw a specialist for a screening. I found out I had some cells in one of my breasts that could have turned cancerous at any given moment. I was told I had a few options. I could have regular screenings every 3 or 4 months until it does develop into cancer. I was told the risk of the cells becoming cancerous was very high due to family history, but it could also potentially never could turn, so I'd just be getting these screenings for no reason. I could get a single mastectomy on the breast with the bad cells, but they'd need to keep an eye on the other one, so I'd still need regular checkups for the other breast. I could get a bilateral mastectomy and remove all of my breast tissue, basically eliminating the risk. I went for the bilateral mastectomy. It was admittedly the most drastic option, but after seeing what cancer did to my mum and grandmothers, I didn't want to risk it. I was warned about scarring, but told it should be fairly minor. It wasn't, and I was left with 2 huge, pink jagged scars on either side of my chest, each about 1 inch long and half an inch wide, and it caused me to go into a severe depression, where it got to the stage of me not even leaving my flat, because I didn't want people to see me, throwing out my mirrors, and getting physically sick looking at myself. I went to a therapist, who suggested a plastic surgeon. The therapist said they'd never normally do that, but it was clearly something I was struggling with, and I might never get over it, and the therapist could see why I struggle with it. Although I'll admit the therapist did send me to ask about scar reduction. The plastic surgeon suggested a cream, a laser, or implants. The cream didn't work, and the laser was both expensive and risky, so I went with the implants. My natural boobs were an F cup, so I went with a slightly smaller DD. Since then my mental health has improved, and I feel a lot better about the way I look. My confidence has gone up, as has my self-esteem. I know I shouldn't put so much into my appearance, but I wasn't exaggerating about these scars. Huge, bright pink, jagged, raised, just really awful to look at, and I hated seeing myself, and they are now nicely hidden away, and you can barely feel them. In the present day, I'm 28 years old, and working in an office. I'm doing a lot better than I was. My coworker, Jill, found out I'd had a boob job, but not about the cancer thing, when myself and my friend from years before the mastectomy were planning a holiday, and she made a joke about me going on a plane with my implants, and Jill overheard. By the end of the day, the entire office knew I'd had a boob job, but not why, and half a dozen people confirmed Jill had told them. Over the next few months, Jill made many jokes and comments about my chest to coworkers when I was in earshot, at one point saying I had more plastic than Barbie and calling me fake in 2 ways. I didn't hear this one myself, but a friend in the office told me that Jill had at one point referred to me as a sack of silicone. I DK what her problem was exactly, but at one point she mentioned the NHS. So I assumed Jill thought that I'd got my tits done for free on taxpayer money. I'd gotten the mastectomy on NHS, but gone private for therapy and implants. I asked her to stop more than once, but unfortunately the places I'd talked to her were places like the lift and the women's bathroom, where there weren't any cameras, and Jill just kept making comments, no matter how often I asked her not to. I wouldn't say it was every single day, but I heard at least 3 comments per week for 3 months. I hit my breaking point when me, Jill, and a few other coworkers were having lunch. I referred to something as being shallow, and Jill said you'd know all about being shallow, while gesturing to my chest. I snapped. I said, do you know why I have these? A few years ago the doctors found potentially cancerous cells in my breast tissue. I was advised to get a mastectomy and was left with huge ugly scars on my chest. I went to see a therapist who sent me to a cosmetic surgeon who advised me to get implants to hide the scars, and I did, just so I could look at myself in the mirror without crying. So maybe next time you want to judge someone for having cosmetic surgery, you should ask them why they had it first. And feeling like that was a mic drop moment, I picked up my food and left. For the rest of the day I had about 1/3 of my office come up to me and offer support, and the rest tell me that Jill was just joking around and I was being a BTCH. I replied that Jill was being a BTCH long before I was. I then got an email from ours saying they wanted to talk to me the following day, and when I called for clarification they mentioned a hostile work environment. Note, this is apparently an American term and holds little weight in England, but it's what was said over the phone. I knew the person who signed off the email and I'd spoken to her. Her name was Debbie, and she was Jill's friend in ours, so I was fairly confident on who had reported me. I realized that, if this was already being sent to ours, I needed as much ammunition as possible, so I went about collecting my information. As Debbie had dealt with me so far, it was safe to assume she would be the person reviewing the complaint with me, and if that was true I was fucked. However, I vaguely remembered a section on complaints that was in my contract when I first signed with the company. I flicked through the contract and there was a part in complaints section that said I was contractually allowed to request a change of reviewer if I felt my allocated reviewer was biased. It was called an impartial overseer. I photocopied the page and highlighted that part. Then I messaged the people who had offered their support over Facebook and said basically ours have asked to see me. Do any of you remember Jill insulting me to your face, and are you willing to write and sign something saying what you heard and when? Not everyone was willing to help as Jill is somewhat feared in the office due to her befriending ours and management, but about 20 people were willing to help me. I guessed roughly when I'd asked Jill to stop previously, the 4 asks over the last few months. Some timings were easy to guess as they'd happened on my break, or when I'd first arrived at work, and I wrote them all down, along with a rough time of when the lunchroom confrontation happened, and a list of names of who was there for the lunchroom confrontation. I got to work slightly early the next morning. I went round everyone who had messaged me, and most of them managed to give me a printed and signed letter. Some didn't manage to write one, but NBD. This isn't exact words as there's 16 letters to sum up here, but the gist was, my name is, their name. I work with Jill last name and opus. On date, at, time, approximate. I spoke with Jill last name, during which she referred to op as, quoted insult. I felt this was inappropriate as it directly related to Op's appearance, and am willing to go on record further to establish that Jill last name has been discussing Op in the workplace in the same manner for 3 months now, causing me discomfort and creating what I feel is a hostile work environment. Signed their name. I wound up with about 16 letters, all from different people, and one of them was in the lunchroom for my conversation with Jill. Some even had bullet pointed lists of everything Jill had said to them about me or other people. As it turns out, Jill has issues with a lot of people's appearances. She apparently made comments about one coworker's weight and something anti-Semitic about a different coworker's nose, all of which were put in these letters. There are about 45 people in the office, so while 16 wasn't a majority, it's still a decent amount. The letters weren't hugely long, most were only a paragraph, but they had all the necessary information. I was asked to come to ours at 10 AM. I took the letters from coworkers, the photocopy of the page in my contract, and my dates and times in a little folder with me. I got there, and Debbie was the one overseeing the interview. She got up from her desk, ready to lead me into another room. I immediately turned to the other hour worker that was currently there and said, "So is my meeting with you?" Then Debbie said, "No, you're with me." I replied that this wouldn't sit well with me, as my contract states I have a right to an impartial overseer, and as I said this, I took the contract page out of my folder. Debbie read it. I wouldn't let her take the paper when there was a shredder so close by, and said she could be impartial. I replied that I really didn't mean to be a pain, but I had it on good authority that the person on the other end of this complaint is her friend, and my contract does say I'm allowed an impartial overseer. Debbie stomped off to get supervisor. Supervisor asks how I know she can't be impartial, and I tell him that I have it on good authority that the Jill, who was on the other end of this complaint, is a close friend of Debbie. He asked Debbie if this was true, to which she only replied I can be impartial. Supervisor took a deep breath, asked the other Rouse rep to come with him, and the 4 of us all went to review the complaint. I thanked them for being so accommodating. I was worried I'd annoyed them. Debbie took out the complaint and all 3 of them went through it with me. Debbie looked homicidal the whole time the interview was happening, as she had clearly anticipated firing me, or at least recommending me being fired. The interview went something like this. It took like over half an hour, and they kept asking me the same questions, but phrased different ways, so this is a really drastically condensed version. Q. You said outside that you think Jill last name reported you. Why is this? A. Jill has had an issue with me for about 3 months now. Q. Why didn't you come to us when you realized Jill had an issue? A. I had no issue with her. Q. What issue does Jill have with you? A. 4 years ago a specialist identified potentially cancerous cells in my breast tissue. I had surgery to remove my breast tissue, thereby removing the cells in the risk. After the surgery I was left with large scars on my chest. I went to a therapist for low self-esteem and depression. The therapist suggested a plastic surgeon who suggested breast implants to cover my scars. All of this is in my medical history, which you have a copy of in my file and my full permission to review. Jill found out about my breast implants, but didn't know about the cancer. Jill had a problem with my breast implants, and decided to communicate this problem to our coworkers. Q. Why do you feel this is true? A. Here's 16 signed statements, all from different coworkers, all testifying that Jill told the entire office I'd had breast implants on the day she found out, and has since made comments about these implants frequently. They have quotes of what Jill said to them about it, and rough dates and times. Q. Rough dates and times? A. No one knew this would be escalated to such an extent, so no one really took notes as and when it happened. Q. What event or events do you think directly led to this complaint of harassment? A. For me, harassment began when Jill told everyone about my breast implants without my consent. But as to the complaint placed against me, it would probably be what happened at about time yesterday in the lunchroom. Jill made a comment about me being shallow while gesturing to my breasts, and I replied by giving her an abridged version of my relevant medical history and ending with a comment about the importance of getting the full story. There are cameras in the lunchroom, so I'm sure you'll be able to find that conversation. I'll admit I could have handled the situation better, but after 3 months I felt I had to put my foot down. Here's a list of names of people who were also present. There were 6 people at the table, including myself and Jill. One of these people is also in those letters and has written their account of the conversation and signed it. Q. Had you had a conversation with Jill prior to this regarding her comments about you? A. Several, spaced out over the last 3 months. Each time I communicated to her that I felt uncomfortable and upset with these comments she was making, and would appreciate it if she were to stop. Q. To your knowledge, was Jill made aware of your former cancer at any point in this time? A. No. It wasn't mentioned in the conversation with my friend she overheard, and I didn't tell her because frankly it's none of her business, and I did not feel the need to detail my medical history to a coworker in order to avoid further sexual harassment. Supervisor stands up and says, well, I think we are done here. He shakes my hand and sends me back to my desk saying that I'd hear from them after they reviewed the evidence, letters, CCTV, medical history and anything they had already, and made a decision on the case. I got back to my desk, pulled up my CV, and prepared to start the job search again. About an hour goes by, then the person who wrote the letter and was there for the lunchroom conversation gets called for a meeting with ours. They come back 10-ish minutes later. The other people who were also there for the lunchroom conversation get called one by one, except Jill. All of them are gone for about 10 minutes, then come back, find a coworker, and say that ours wants to see them. Then the people who wrote letters but weren't there yesterday are also called one by one, and are each gone for about 10 minutes each, some longer, some shorter. By about 3:30 it looks like everyone who wrote a letter or was there in the lunchroom has been interviewed. Then, finally, Jill gets called in. She's gone for about 30 minutes and comes back fuming. She glares at me while I work, but I ignore her. 4:30-ish. Jill gets called into ours again. 5 PM rolls around. Everyone is either leaving or getting ready to leave when Jill storms back into the office. She glares at me the whole time she packs up her desk. She then starts telling anyone who will listen that I got her fired before shoving her way onto the lift. An email comes in from ours. My case is closed. I work for a construction company and we do remodeling on homes. We have a rule here that we get to keep anything we find hidden behind the walls. We hired this guy, we really needed a worker badly, who was a total a-hole from day one. I've been working for this company for 5 years and this guy has only been doing construction for 1 year after he got fired from his accounting job for getting a DUI. Anyways, he would always make fun of my clothes and my accent, and one day he went too far by telling my boss about my private Instagram account pics. He got on my phone and looked through my Instagram page and showed my boss pictures of me smoking weed. Little did he know that my boss is my friend from 8 years when we used to smoke together before we both quit. I was so mad that he violated my privacy, then I made a plan to fuck him over. He was the kind of guy who would always come in late and complain that trains or traffic is why he was always late. One day I overheard him saying that if he won the lottery he would quit this job for not getting the respect he deserves. You have to earn your respect here. One day I bought some fake gold coins online and I put them in a metal box I found at the antique store and waited for a chance to hide it in a wall. Luckily I did not have to wait long. The day he found the coins it seemed like it was his best day ever. First thing he did when he opened the box, he called my boss a fing loser and he quit immediately on the spot. He said F this place, I'm rich. Lol. Little did he know was that was the best day of my life. After he quit my boss told us that he was going to fire him anyways for always showing up late. I wish I could see the look on his face when he finds out the gold coins are fake. Best $40 I spent in my life. About 6 or 7 months ago, my neighbor got a drone. I don't mind people having hobbies, but for some reason he insisted on flying like the biggest jerk possible. He would hover in front of other houses and windows, try to race cars going down the road, and worst of all he had a habit of flying his drone in my fenced backyard buzzing over my dog, diving low just over my dog's head, before circling around to do it again. My dog isn't small, he's about 70 pounds and a Malamute, but the drone terrified him, and I was worried what would happen if it hit him. I asked my neighbor several times to please not fly in my yard and explained that it was scaring my dog. He basically told me to get lost and laughed in my face. When it still continued, I called the police. Unfortunately there wasn't much they could do other than ask him to please not fly over my house/property. Finally, in late December it happened. My dog got tired of his shit and managed to catch the drone right as it was diving towards him. He shredded the drone. The thing was just a jumbled mess of wires and plastic. Neighbor was pissed. He stormed over to my house swearing and threatening me, which I ignored. A week later, I got a summons to small claims court. He wanted $900 for the cost of his drone and an additional $300 for supposedly denying him access to his property. The drone sat in my yard for a couple hours before it was retrieved. F that. He could have killed my dog. I don't have kids or a girlfriend. I just have my dog who is my best friend for the past 7 years. That dog has moved with me 3 times. Was there when I graduated college. Saw me buy my first house and my first new car. I love my dog. Went to legal advice. Got some great help from them. Turns out, him suing me was the best thing to ever happen. When we got to small claims court, the judge basically laughed away his claims that I had intentionally trained my dog to attack his drone. But little did he know I was prepared. I had dozens of photos of my yard showing it was impossible for him to accidentally fly that low to my dog, videos of him harassing my dog in the past, and I had saved all my medical bills from taking my dog to the vet. $700 for an X-ray? Check. Another $250 to sedate him during? Why not? Don't want him being uncomfortable. Full dental exam with tooth cleaning/repair? $400. Then there was the cost of anti-anxiety meds and a secondary checkup, wet food for a week in case his teeth were hurt, and extra just for good measure. In the end, the a-hole ended up owing me almost $2,000 and now is being investigated by the FAA for not having a registered drone and violating several FAA regulations concerning drone flight, too near an airport, too close to other people, out of sight of operator and way above the maximum altitude. Enjoy never being allowed to fly drones again. In high school, 10 plus years ago, I was quiet and attentive in class. Teachers liked me. I wasn't popular, but I had good friends. I say all this to explain that high school was relatively calm for me. I played sports, was on the student newspaper, and got decent grades. However, that all changed my second semester junior year. I've always been a voracious reader. My freshman English teacher recommended I move up to the honors English track, so I did for freshman, sophomore, and the first half of junior year. Then I was put into classical literature my second semester junior year. I've always loved Greek and Roman stories, and had already read your typical high school classical reading list on my own. I didn't mind reading them again, until I met Ms. Umbridge. She put on a sweet facade, but she was downright evil. She also decided she hated me. I still do not know why, or what transgression I committed, but she hated me. I assume it was my habit of sometimes nodding off in classes. At the time, I had undiagnosed thyroid issues, and was getting up at 5 AM for swim practice. I say sometimes, because it happened maybe twice a month total between all 8 classes. I don't remember nodding off in her class, but it could have happened. Anyways, her class was 50% essays/written reports. The rest were random quizzes and a couple tests. I was on the student newspaper, and I was a decent writer. I wasn't worried about maintaining a B or up. We wrote our first paper, and I got a D. I was shocked. The only class I struggled in was chemistry, and still my lowest assignment grade was a C. After class, I asked Ms. Umbridge what I did wrong, because her notes were minimal. She told me my assessment of the material was uninspired. Okay, can you direct me to an example of an inspired assessment? Come back during study hall. Thinking she'd have some example materials for me to review, I got a pass to see her during study hall. Nope. She spent the full hour basically telling me I was an idiot. I remember leaving and crying because she didn't tell me anything constructive. My friend, the eventual valedictorian, offered to help me on my next paper. My friend and I spent hours on my next paper. She never got below an A on anything. I got another D. My friend was furious. She took it to her app English teacher and asked him to review it. She said she was entering a writing competition and wanted advice. He said it was great. Her typical A+ work. My friend, quicker on the uptake, asked me for a copy of my original assignment. She asked her app English teacher to look it over too, and he said she should enter the first one. This one was still good. He'd probably give it an A, but the other paper was better. My friend was convinced Ms. Umbridge was treating me unfairly for some reason, and she must not like me. My friend wanted me to tell my parents or my school counselor. A teacher didn't like me. That had never happened. Sure, they didn't all love me, but none had actively disliked me. I decided I'd try one more time, but this time get Ms. Umbridge to help me. Despite the previous horrors of spending study hall with Ms. Umbridge, I went to her office during study hall 3 times before the next paper was due. She reviewed the paper and gave me tips on revising it each time. She did this in red pen. I took notes. By the time the next paper was due, I had 3 revised versions with her notes in red ink on each one. I got a D+. She smirked and congratulated me on my improvement. BTCH. I was done. My friend was right. This bitch had it out for me and was giving me shit grades on purpose. I'm a laid back person, but I was pissed. Never before been this pissed. I took my paper to my newspaper teacher. Sure, he didn't teach English, but our student paper constantly won awards because of his work. I told him I was having trouble in English and could he please look over my paper and give me advice. He was a little confused as to why I didn't ask my English teacher, but he did it. He also told me it was great, but gave me a few minor changes to make. I asked him if he thought it was a B or better. He said he'd give it an A, not 100%, but a solid A. I went to my friend, and we brainstormed. I couldn't request a drop/add. This wasn't college. You just don't switch classes at my high school, unless the teacher recommends an honor placement. That's not true, said my friend. The football and basketball guys get moved to easier classes all the time, to keep their grades up, so they are eligible for games. The athletics director was a friend of my dad, so I requested a meeting with him and my swim coach after school one day. I told them I was in danger of losing my eligibility to swim because I was pulling a T in a class. I wanted to move classes, but I knew I'd need approval from administration, which I wouldn't get without a good reason. They asked if I had requested help. I explained I had asked for help from multiple people, but my grade wasn't improving. I didn't know what to do. They asked to see my papers. I sat while they read them. They both looked at me confused. Neither of them could understand how those papers were worth only a D. The student VP was brought in. He asked to help me. I explained my friend. He knew who she was, again future valedictorian, and she had even asked her app English teacher to look it over for advice. I had also asked my newspaper teacher to help me. Student VP asked if I had ever actually asked my teacher for help. I smiled and handed him the 3 revised versions of paper number 3 with Ms. Umbridge's red ink all over them. He frowned. App English teacher and my newspaper teacher were pulled into the meeting. They were each asked to grade the papers. All 3 papers got an A or better. While this was going on, my dad was called in by the athletics director. My dad was pissed. He demanded I be moved to another class and that Ms. Umbridge be put under review. Clearly, she wasn't grading students on their work, but on her own personal opinions. The school administration obviously bristled at the accusation that a teacher was treating students unfairly. A lot of arguing that I wasn't allowed to sit on occurred in the VP's office. I could hear plenty of yelling as 6 adult men argued over the appropriate next steps. It was decided that myself, my dad, VP, and athletics director would have a meeting with Ms. Umbridge. The following morning before school we all met. Ms. Umbridge seemed to think she was going to get to tell everyone why I was so stupid. VP explained that if I maintained a D in her class, I would lose my extracurricular eligibility, and we were all meeting to discuss what to do. She smirked and said I should be moved to the non-honors English track, and I had no business being in honors English. I didn't have the aptitude to understand the complex classical literature they were studying, and I probably would need a tutor to even get through basic English. I've never seen my father so red, and I half expected to see steam come out of his ears. VP asked why she didn't try to help me improve. She said it was up to students to put in the initiative to get better. VP asked if that meant I had never asked her for help. She said I had not. VP then pulled out the 3 revised versions of paper number 3 and handed them to Ms. Umbridge. Now it was her turn to be read. She called me a liar and said those notes weren't hers. Things got heated and I was asked to leave again. I sat outside the office. This time the secretary was there and we both heard the shouting. School was set to start in 30 minutes and they were all just shouting. Then app English teacher and newspaper teacher were called in again. More shouting. About 5 minutes to the start of classes, the teachers left, and I was called back in. If looks could kill, I'd have died then and there. When Ms. Umbridge walked out of VP's office, I was being moved to basic English effective immediately. My current grade would not carry over. I would not need to make up any past assignments, and new teacher would be instructed to grade me only on the assignments going forward. My new English teacher, Ms. Honey, ended up being the English department head. She was at least 65 and had been doing this for decades. After 2.5 years of honors English, this class was easier than PE. I barely had to try to get an A, but I refused to let Ms. Honey think Ms. Umbridge had been right. I tried harder in that class than any other class that semester. I finished projects so quickly that I was asked to tutor a girl struggling in the class. I spent half the class period just helping this girl understand the material. I helped her go from a C to a B+. I got something like 104% in the class. At the end of the semester, Ms. Honey called me into her office during study hall. She was recommending I return to honors English for senior year. I must have looked panicked because she assured me Ms. Umbridge would not be my teacher. In fact, she would not be anyone's teacher. She was leaving at the end of the school year. Ms. Umbridge was only in her late 20s and unmarried. Too early to retire. And my high school was in one of the best paying school districts in the state. I knew what leaving meant, but Ms. Honey still explained that I was put in her class on purpose. The school administration trusted Ms. Honey to determine the truth of Ms. Umbridge's claim that I was basically a lying idiot. Ms. Honey stated I very clearly belonged in honors English. She apologized if her class had not been challenging enough for me. I cried. I mean full on ugly, snot cried. I didn't realize it, but part of me had actually believed Ms. Umbridge up until that moment. Ms. Honey hugged me and consoled me. I spent senior year in honors English and spent my study hall tutoring Ms. Honey's struggling students. To this day, I think about that awful woman fairly regularly. My career is strongly writing based, and I still worry obsessively over my writing. I hope she never taught again, because she wreaked havoc on my self-confidence. If you enjoyed the stories, slap the like and subscribe button for more of them, and don't forget to support the original writers with an upvote. Links are in the description. Peace out, and catch you tomorrow.